Morning insight becomes a moment for global cooperation. It was a warm morning in Ouagadougou, May 2025, when President Ibrahim Traoré received a confidential file from Finance Minister Dr. Aminata Tall. The 36-year-old leader was reviewing international trade documents when she entered, her expression focused. "Mr. President, you may want to review this right away," she said calmly. Ibrahim looked up from his desk, attentive to her tone. "What is it, Minister?" Dr. Tall placed the folder in front of him. This was identified during standard monitoring of international financial flows linked to U.S. development support for Africa. He opened the folder and began to read. The materials referenced a shift in the application of development funds originally designated for African infrastructure. Dr. Tall elaborated. Approximately $2.3 billion. Initially planned for infrastructure programs, appears to have been redirected toward alternative domestic expenditures. Ibrahim reviewed the document's bank transfers, communications, and summary records with a thoughtful expression. "Are we confident in the source and accuracy?" "Yes, Mr. President. The documentation has been authenticated by our cybersecurity team and aligns with recognized Treasury details." Leaning back, Ibrahim considered the broader context. "Please prepare a full analysis with a clear overview of the scope." 3 hours later, Dr. Tall and a team of analysts reconvened in the adjoining conference room, equipped with charts and data. "The funding structure appears complex," she explained. "The resources were processed through various organizations, including names like African Development Initiative and Sahel Progress Foundation. We could not confirm that the intended projects were completed." They also noted internal communications suggesting adjustments to fund distribution within domestic contexts. Even the $847 million planned for health programs may have supported alternative administrative needs. Dr. Tall said gently. Ibrahim stood and walked to the window, observing the city beginning its day. "Our communities are still in need of essential services, education, healthcare, clean water. Any changes in support strategies must be transparent and collaborative." Dr. Tall then shared that an additional $3 billion in future allocations had been identified under similar conditions. Ibrahim's thoughts solidified. "This calls for responsible action. Let us begin by respectfully reaching out to our counterparts to seek clarification and suggest a path forward. If further conversation is needed, we can engage broader international dialogue." Foreign Minister Moussa Cabaret and Defense Minister Colonel Drummond Connett voiced support. "We will need composure and clarity," Ibrahim said, reaching out to Washington at 9 a.m. local time, 7 a.m. in Washington. President Traoré sat with Minister Cabaret to make the first call. After several transfers, a familiar voice answered. "Trump. This is President Trump. Who's this?" Ibrahim, measured and respectful, replied, "Mr. President. This is Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. I'd like to briefly discuss a matter related to development cooperation." There was a pause, then a response. "Go ahead," Ibrahim continued. "We've reviewed documentation that suggests changes in the allocation of funds originally intended for African development initiatives. We would like to understand the situation and find the best way forward together." There was a moment of silence as the conversation continued, with Ibrahim maintaining his usual calm and respectful tone. A call that echoed globally. President Ibrahim Traoré sat poised, the secure line to Washington open. Across from him, Foreign Minister Traoré silently observed, "Ibrahim, Mr. President, I wanted to provide you the opportunity to clarify and address some concerning financial discrepancies we've identified. African development allocations." Trump, pausing. "Discrepancies? What are you talking about, Ibrahim?" "Our teams have verified documents showing approximately $2.3 billion, initially earmarked for African infrastructure and health initiatives, may have been redirected to unrelated expenditures." The conversation grew tense. "Trump, that's just budget management, strategic reallocation." Ibrahim calmly, "Understood. However, some of the records we reviewed involve personal invoices, renovation work at private facilities, for instance." Trump, "Those were necessary, business-related." Ibrahim, "We have receipts indicating funds meant for public welfare were used elsewhere. Our hope is to resolve this constructively. Transparency and integrity must guide our partnership." There was a pause, then a raised tone. "Trump, you're making a mistake bringing this up. You don't understand the complexities of American politics." Ibrahim respectfully, "We fully respect the sovereignty of the United States. Likewise, we must advocate for the rights and trust of our citizens." Trump, "You're not in a position to make demands." Ibrahim, "I'm not making demands. I'm inviting accountability. I am offering 48 hours for your administration to review and, if necessary, initiate corrective measures. Should that window close without a response, we'll bring the issue to appropriate international institutions for clarity and resolution." Trump, "You're overstepping." Ibrahim, "I believe in dialogue and diplomacy. That is why we're beginning here, directly, before any further steps." The call concluded, with Ibrahim remaining composed. Foreign Minister Traoré, still seated, turned to him. "Mr. President, you've handled this with professionalism. The position is principled." Ibrahim nodded. "Let us now prepare for transparency, readiness, and solidarity in the hours that followed." The presidential team worked swiftly. The office transformed into a command center. Advisors coordinated legal, diplomatic, and security contingencies. "Dr. Tall, our evidence has been securely stored in multiple international locations. Regardless of developments, the information will remain safe." Defense Minister Colonel Connaught updated Ibrahim, "Our regional security partners are ready. We've been in contact with neighboring nations. All are coordinating with us." Diplomatic messages of support arrived from Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and others. "We stand with Burkina Faso," said President Macky Sall of Senegal. Meanwhile, international journalists began arriving in CNN, BBC, France 24, and Al Jazeera requested exclusive coverage of what was shaping up to be a major international disclosure. A defining press conference. By 2 p.m., the presidential press hall was filled with international media. President Traoré entered, standing before a global audience. His voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I stand before you today to share findings of great international importance." He began detailing verified documents, bank transfers, development contracts, and project funding records. "Over the past 18 months, we have identified the redirection of funds designated for African development. These funds, allocated for hospitals, clean water, and education, were instead routed toward unrelated expenses. Slides appeared on screen, transparent, documented, and independently audited. CNN's Sarah Chen asked, "Mr. President, how did you uncover this?" "Through routine financial oversight within our Ministry of Finance. The irregularities prompted a broader review." He displayed invoices tied to luxury renovations and presented communications referencing the redirection. "These findings are not accusations, they are records. Our objective is not confrontation, but integrity and justice." Global reactions as evidence comes to light. As President Ibrahim Traoré concluded his press conference, James Wright of the BBC raised his hand. "Mr. President, have you spoken directly with President Trump about these matters?" "Ibrahim, yes, I spoke with President Trump yesterday. During our conversation, he described the financial reallocations as strategic decisions. Additionally, he expressed concern over our intention to bring the matter to light." A hush fell over the room. "Are you saying there were strong words exchanged?" Wright asked. "The conversation is documented. Our focus is on transparency, and we are committed to providing international institutions with all relevant information." President Traoré remained calm and composed. The information presented was supported by documented records and forensic review. Global media responds within minutes. International news outlets began broadcasting the story. CNN's banner read, "Burkina Faso's President, Development Funds Misapplied by Us." BBC led with, "President Traoré calls for global review of development funding practices." At the White House, the situation evolved rapidly. The press corps convened for a briefing. White House Press Secretary Sarah Matthews, "The President firmly denies any mismanagement. We are reviewing the claims thoroughly." When pressed by reporters, "Sarah, are you saying the $2.3 billion in question is fully accounted for?" "We are still conducting an internal audit. The President's financial engagements are complex and involve many layers of administration." Across social media, the issue gained momentum. A recording of Traoré's earlier call with President Trump, handled lawfully and transparently, circulated. Public discourse began shifting, a measured response to a growing situation in the United States. Political figures began responding. Speaker Nancy Pelosi remarked, "If these findings are confirmed, this would represent a significant breach of ethical stewardship regarding international aid." Republican leadership issued cautious statements. Senator Mitch McConnell, "We will examine the facts thoroughly. All parties deserve a fair review." Globally, institutions reacted swiftly. The European Union called for an independent financial audit. The African Union expressed strong support for President Traoré's transparency. The United Nations Security Council scheduled a session to address governance in aid disbursement. Markets responded with sensitivity. The dollar experienced short-term volatility amid uncertainty in Washington and Ouagadougou behind closed doors. U.S. agencies began reviewing financial transactions. According to reports, internal communications acknowledged discrepancies. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen reportedly confirmed alignment between Traoré's evidence and known data. "Our objective is to ensure all processes remain consistent with federal guidelines," she stated internally. Meanwhile, FBI Director Christopher Wray announced, "We are opening an inquiry to determine the origin and management of development funds allocated for Africa." From Burkina Faso, President Traoré granted interviews with leading networks. Our concern is not confrontation, he told CNN. It is ensuring development partnerships remain transparent and ethical. His demeanor, composed, confident, and focused, stood in contrast to growing tensions in Washington, a historic turning point as international interest grew. Political figures across the U.S. acknowledged the seriousness of the moment. House Speaker Mike Johnson announced, "The House will conduct a formal inquiry. These matters involve public funds and global partnerships." Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer added, "We must uphold moral responsibility, both to our partners and to the American people." In a final public address, President Trump maintained his denial. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said. "These were operational allocations." However, questions about documentation and oversight persisted. That evening, discussions about invoking constitutional protocols began. Vice President J.D. Vance met with cabinet members in a measured and structured review of options across Africa, unity and respecting Ouagadougou. President Traoré was briefed on the response from African nations and international partners. "Mr. President," said Foreign Minister Kabore, "you've sparked a new conversation on integrity in global aid." Ibrahim, "We simply did what was right. The principles of fairness and transparency belong to every nation." As investigations proceeded, independent authorities secured the questioned funds, which were scheduled for restoration to their intended uses across African regions. President Traoré's decision to lead with evidence and dialogue rather than conflictory defined global expectations of principled leadership. His approach resonated not only across Africa, but within institutions and communities around the world.